You. All right, Mr. Assemblymember Gloria. Happy to have you today. Thank you so much. Just try to be proper. Or next mayor call you just preemptive mayor Gloria. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm sorry?
Of course. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to have you on here. Kind of same thing with Steven. You've been involved with cannabis in the city of San Diego for a long time. I think you were a council president when the first retail ordinance passed in 2013 and 2014. But real quick, I'm gonna give you an intro for those that don't know. Sorry, got just so excited here. Go ahead and say, yes, thank you very much, Assemblymember Gloria. Todd Gloria is a San Diego native, son of a janitor and a nurse. He started off, worked with Congresswoman Susan Davis, and moved up to be her district director. He then was a San Diego Housing Commissioner, previous D3 council member, and interim mayor in 2013. He is currently the assembly member in the 78th district and majority whip. On council, as we just kind of talked about, he voted for the initial cannabis ordinance in 2014. I know I missed probably a lot of things. You have a tremendous resume, so yeah, thank you so much. But I did want to just start off with your experience in this, once again, before cannabis was cool in 2013 and 2014. Why did you really take this issue on? What were your findings, and I guess why did you feel the need at that time to move this forward?
Yeah, I enjoy sharing that story, and I want to include the fact that it wasn't just me, but I would acknowledge former council member Marty Emerald, who was my partner in this effort. Before I tell you that quick story, I just want to thank Stephen Whitburn. I was listening, I was doing email, but I was also listening, and I appreciated his kind comments. Stephen's going to make a very good member of the city council, and I basically should just say ditto to everything he said and save you all some time. But I would like to be to share that story because put yourself back in time to 2008 when compassionate use was authorized by California voters back when I was in high school. And then here we are all these years later, and the city had still done nothing. And Marty and I would listen to public comment every day at Tuesday, members of our community who were sick and dying, begging for compassionate use, something that was allowed under the law, but because the city had chosen to stick its head in the sand, meant that they couldn't have safe and legal access in the city of San Diego. But that doesn't mean there wasn't access. Some of you may remember about that time, it was a bit of a Wild West situation where we had literally hundreds of illegal dispensaries operating all around the community. And it was that sort of human compassion for people who are sick and asking for needed medication, to the concerns of community members who are saying, these don't work well in the community, let's do something about it. And so Marty and I pulled together the task force, and Stephen was very kind to accept the unpaid job of going out and doing the legwork of really collecting ideas for what a model ordinance would look like in San Diego. Brought that to the city council. It took far longer than we wanted, not because Stephen wasn't working hard, but because, again, not that long ago, this issue, Dahlin says before it was cool, some would suggest it's always been cool, but it wasn't necessarily as accepted. And so it was that sort of political objection that Marty and I were against the entire way. And I would tell you that, I actually used my office budget to help pay for this work because we were not getting support from the mayor's office. As Stephen mentioned, we have a strong mayor form of government. And if the mayor doesn't want something, then city staff doesn't work on it. And so Marty and I really did this work with the help of volunteers like Stephen, ultimately got something to the city council. I will confess that it was far more conservative than I wanted in terms of legislation that had my name on it, but it was what was necessary to finally get some rules of the road on to the books. And what I would say right off the bat is I appreciate those of you who are in the industry who took that more conservative approach and ran with it and really helped to show that people's worst fears, Stephen was talking about that, I remember those comments vividly, that this would be the end of times if we allowed for retail use in our community, that hasn't come to pass. And that hasn't been an accident. That has been the purposeful effort of a lot of folks who understood what we were trying to do. And what I'd hoped for is starting to come to pass, where that original ordinance has been amended a handful of times since, recognizing the conditions and realizing that some of those more restrictive elements could be changed. I believe that more changes must come. And as this industry has shown its ability to operate responsibly in the neighborhoods, the city should be a partner in that effort to allow more operation. And I look forward to being a mayor that helps facilitate that process, both because, again, I see a community that's working hard, but I also see an economy that needs to grow our revenues and employ more people who are currently out of work. And I can think that this is actually a mutually beneficial initiative that we can take on together.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I think you hit on a couple of big points there. Is so much of this has taken, or so much of the changes to the ordinance have taken place outside of any help or resources from the mayor's office. The mayor has more or less threatened to veto on anything cannabis since he's been in there. So it's been more only council led, more or less, for the last few different changes or updates on the ordinance. So, so I'm happy that you say that that you as a new mayor would help provide some research or some direction for the industry. I think that's incredibly needed. And then secondly, retail is going to be hurt real bad after all of this. And I think it's kind of a bit of a shame that something that generates, well, one of the main issues when it comes to licensing is the amount of traffic that these facilities bring in, which, when we're talking about an issue around commercial zones and retail, this could help bring a lot of economic activity to those commercial zones. So, I'm happy that you highlighted that this could be a use for, or it could be a tool to kind of revitalize retail. Any specifics on that at all, or any changes? Because, right now, retail is out in the industrial zones. How do you feel about maybe bringing those into some commercial zones?
Well, very similar to what Stephen was sharing. There's an openness on my part. And again, I think what has happened, what was different from 2008 to 2013 when we were doing this work, is that the public has seen this in action now. And, I am sympathetic to the neighborhoods at the time that had not seen this. It's hard to understand something you've never seen before. Now we have several years of legal operation, and people's worst fears have just not come to pass. And so when the original ordinance consigned much of this use to industrial zones, it wasn't necessarily that was a planning best practice. That was a political compromise born out of the time that we were in. What I believe, what I think, and what we should be looking at is that there are probably communities that are much more receptive. As Stephen said, District 3 voted overwhelmingly for adult legalization. And so a community-led process where folks who see vacant storefronts, and let's talk about vacant storefronts, because while there's a lot of demonization of cannabis dispensaries, let me tell you, that is nothing compared to a vacant storefront, a black spot in the middle of a block that really is like a cancer that grows and affects other retail businesses and brings down a neighborhood. So, there are broader issues about the city's ability to work with really any business. But if you have a growing industry, its only constriction is what government has put on them, then this is a point of connection that we should talk about. And so recognizing again that the reasons for the zoning really don't necessarily reflect, I think, today's opinions. That's an opportunity for reopening and reconsidering. As I remember when we were passing this ordinance, there were two amendments from the floor. Those are usually deadly because I don't always feel like they've been well vetted. But it was, again, what we were trying to get to the majority necessary to actually pass this ordinance. And one was the restrictive zoning to largely just industrial zones. The other was the cap per council district. And I don't know that either of those have served our city well. I know it certainly hasn't served the industry well. And these would be two areas that are probably worth additional exploration to understand, okay, how can we more surgically match that to communities that would be open? I think a lot of communities would be open. And again, to what you were saying a moment ago, Donald, what a transformational difference it would have to both have the city council and the mayor's office all agreeing that this is a worthy endeavor. And if we can work on it together, I think whatever controversies and concerns, objections there may be, will not be quite as difficult to address and ameliorate when there's actual collaboration between the two branches of government.
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest thing we found around all these policies is just education to residents. A lot of people, still kind of have that, the demonization or stereotype of the industry. So, if we're able to educate as a city or, lead as a city about all of this too, I think that would be very, very effective and help qualm some of those concerns in a lot of these communities.
Yeah. Well, I'd
Yeah.
hope to keep my experiences with the ordinance and in my time in Sacramento, where I will tell you that the attitude of the legislature is very different than city councils when it comes to cannabis. And, as mayor, be able to explain to San Diegans what this really looks like and what this could be. And again, that's a big part of this job. Stephen was right a moment ago when he was saying listens a lot more, that we should listen a lot, but there is an educational role that must be played both from industry, but also from elected leaders. And I would never have a problem saying that there's a dispensary just a couple blocks from my house in the part where District 3 is talking about. It actually opened during the pandemic. I've been home every day since. I'm able to watch this thing unfold in my neighborhood. And Don, I'll tell you, there's nothing different. What's different is that vacant property is no longer vacant. There's actually activity there. There are citizens coming in and out and creating the kind of activity on the street that actually, frankly, helps the neighborhood, doesn't hurt it.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of to change direction here, taxation. It's one of the biggest things hurting the industry. As we talked with Stephen there, it's about 35 to 40% effective tax rate on these products. Being both from the state and seeing some of the things that you could do to maybe change things there versus the local level. What do you think about taxation? What type of relief or assistance can be provided?
I think that we should adjust the tax rates downward, particularly while we have such a large black market still operating. While the zoning restrictions and other sorts of land use provisions have been, I think, detrimental to the growth of a legal industry, I think probably the most impactful thing has been the taxation system, in that just, you and I both, we're going to shop where we can get the best deal, right? And while I think the vast majority of people want to be legal, when the cost differential is so much, it's understandable that people will vote with their pocketbooks. And from my perspective, and let me remind folks, I was chair of the city's budget committee for 6 years. And I've seen situations like this before where the city would insist upon, oh God, you said the percentage rate a moment ago, Donald, what was it, 30%?
Like 30 to 40%. Yeah.
So when it's 30% and no one's buying it, 30% of zero is zero, right? And we had something similar when I was on the city council. Some of you may know that the city owns Petco Park. And the city insisted on an agreement with the Padres that any non-baseball activity, that the city would get 100% of the proceeds from whatever that is, a concert, a monster truck rally, whatever it is. Well, interestingly, when we insisted on 100% of the revenue, nothing was going there. In part because the Padres had no financial incentive to make investments in that, and the city certainly wasn't going to pay to convert the baseball field into a monster truck rally. When we changed the percentages and actually created a market incentive for the Padres to invest in things like a stage for Taylor Swift to perform on, then guess what? We started getting a ton more revenue. So again, 0% of 100% of zero is zero. Inverting that, and I forget what the percentages were for that deal, but it is hundreds of thousands, not millions, to the city. I see a similar predicament here. Because of the high taxation rate, we are not hitting the marks. And you see those news stories about once a year or so when the city or the state discloses its revenues. And, a lot of people thought that we were going to pay for, golden roads and full health care for everybody. And,
buy a new stadium.
Hall School, whatever. Right. How many times have I constituents say that to me? Well, we'll just use the marijuana proceeds. And then come to find out it's not what people expected. Again, I think the prime reason for that is the percentage rate is so high. So I think that it's actually in the city's interest to do what it can to reduce those rates, knowing that there's some of these are assessed locally. And we've done legislation in Sacramento to try and do this, and with mixed results. But point is, I think if we can adjust those downward, we actually will net more money to the city. And again, old budget chair, soon to become hopefully the mayor, facing a massive budget deficit because of our recession. This is a mutually beneficial way to make sure that I have the money I need to pay for public safety, libraries, road repair, and you all have the ability to operate your businesses that are legal in the state of California in the city of San Diego.
Yeah, fantastic.
And
so then, yeah, exactly. So on that too. We only have 36 retail licenses that are allowed and 40 marijuana production facilities that are allowed, cannabis production facilities, I think they changed to. I guess, do you think that expanding the market would help with generating more revenue and especially more investments if we're allowing more business owners to put money into more licenses?
Yeah, within reason. I mean, there, of course, simple economics, there is an oversaturation that can happen, and that wouldn't be healthy for the market. But, as you point out, Alan, this political amendment that was offered to the ordinance that created this restrictive 36 permits. It's interesting that even after all these years, we still haven't even hit that target.
Yeah.
And you mentioned also a moment ago about the traffic, and that is a concern I actually have heard or even observed. I've driven by some of these. A lot of folks, but again, I think that's because we've only have a limited number of outlets, legal outlets in the city. It understands why you push so many people into just a handful of places, why you get this to happen. So I already mentioned a moment ago an openness to revisiting this again, because it wasn't born out of, I think, a particular request from the community. I think it was what was politically necessary to pass that ordinance at a time that before a legalization for adult use. And again, the world has changed pretty significantly. So I would have an eye on making sure we don't oversaturate the market. Obviously, there's a lot of folks working in this space, and we don't want the industry that is still relatively nascent to collapse for the opposite reason, right? But what we know right now is we have an overly constricted market that is also harming. So it's always a golden middle path, right? Not too much on one side, not too much on the other. It's this incremental progress that I think has been working well. The difference is whether or not you're gonna have leaders that are gonna willing to take that next step, and the step after that, and the step after that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So then on that social equity, this is something that's or equity in ownership of these licenses has really dwindled since, I started back in 2015 on all this, and it was amazing how many women own their own businesses, how many people of color own their own businesses, and with legalization, we've really seen that percentage of ownership decline. Any thoughts on what you would maybe put forth to develop a social equity program? There's been a few other jurisdictions that have done it. What are your thoughts, or I guess any ideas on what you'd put forth there?
Well, we should do that for the reason I think you're alluding to. But if I can just take a moment down, I want to point out that this industry has been talking about the inequities, particularly for Black and Brown communities, long before Black Lives Matter and the obviously more recent tragedies. And that deserves to be lifted up and acknowledged and appreciated. While many more folks are dialed into the issues of structural racism in our community and in our country, the cannabis community has long understood that and has been talking about it for some time. And that's just something that's worthy of acknowledgement and praise. For me, yes, and I think we should try and correct some of the historic wrongs, recognizing that some of what was old policy in terms of criminalization, incarceration of folks who are engaging in cannabis, those are no longer crimes. And unfortunately, those criminal records or that lack of historic wealth building, generational wealth, really has shut out people out of this industry. And so I think that when going back to that taxes question, and concern or an observation I have is that rather than taking the revenues from taxing cannabis in San Diego and making sure that we're doing proper enforcement, education, and other initiatives, it really goes into the black box of the city's general fund. I think one of the pulling that out of the general fund to understand where we're spending on that. Some of it can go to general fund uses. We're all citizens of the city and we want it to do well, but we should divert some of it to make sure that enforcement is appropriate, that education, to your point before about people understanding what this industry is and what it can do and what we want it to do. But to this question of social equity, we're not going to resolve every historic wrong, but we can make strategic investments in relatively low cost interventions that I think could go a long way. Quick example, I've had the privilege of going to speak to Dr. Brown's class at City College in the past. And he is having a class in cannabis, which is kind of an entry point for helping to recruit and train future workers in this industry. And when I've gone to that class, I see a very diverse classroom setting, right? And so a class like that can take someone and give them the education, the training, the background, the information, the connections and contacts. That's how you start taking incremental steps towards addressing the equity concern. And that would be something that we should partner with the community college district on. We should partner with the county and other nonprofit NGOs, the Workforce Partnership and others. I can think of a number of mutually beneficial relationships, collaborations that would get to this social equity issue. Again, controlling for the fact that these are relatively low cost interventions that I think are still doable in the context of a restricted economy dealing with a recession. And again, I'm suggesting that this is a part of an economic stimulus plan that could help us get out of this recession.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so I'm just getting some questions here. Make sure we get to them. All right. Yeah, so sorry, want to kind of jump back to that a little bit. So there are some, well, one, the state is offering a lot of money for social equity programs in jurisdictions, and San Diego County entirely, like not even just the city of San Diego, but the county has lost out on millions of potential dollars from the city. Councilmember Montgomery's office and Councilmember Ward's office were looking into this, but we never really got to a point that we would be able to apply for those grants to help either develop it or to provide resources for a social equity program. So I guess more immediately, there are those funds that can help develop the program and for research and everything. Have you discussed that at the state level at all, or I guess any thoughts on that aspect of it?
Well, Don, I hate to break it to you, but this isn't unique to cannabis. San Diego doesn't always perform well or compete well for statewide resources. I'd argue that's true also at the federal level. And this is actually an area where I think I have a value add in this campaign. My opponent likes to criticize me for spending my career in public service. Forgive me for loving my hometown so much that I'd spend my whole career trying to make it a better place to live. And I would say that, my ability to come back and lead the city, having built strong relationships with our governor and all of our statewide elected officials, with our congressional delegation, being able to call Kamala Harris or being able to text Gavin Newsom, I think is going to give us an advantage to turn around this situation where cities that are far smaller than us continually eat our lunch when it comes to getting our fair share of state resources. So while I'm criticized by my opponent for this experience, I actually think it's a feature of my candidacy and hopefully my administration to have the relationships, to have the context, to have the knowledge of how this works. And again, it's not just cannabis. We lost out on a lot of smart growth funding from our cap and trade dollars. These are funds that would be used to build more affordable housing in San Diego. We got none of that this year. And there were really failures on the local level that, again, a different kind of mayor could have different outcomes. Believe me, I will be in San Diego because I'm the mayor, but you'll see me traveling to Sacramento and Washington, D.C., knocking on those doors of my former colleagues and former contacts to make sure that they don't forget about the second largest city in the state. Too often it seems that people think that San Francisco is the second largest city in the state. I beg to differ. San Diego is literally double the amount of population as San Francisco, and people in Sacramento need to understand that.
Yeah, I mean the term San Diego is an island is a little too accurate in that sense, just with how much we miss out on. Even just on that in cannabis, I think at the BCC there was no board members from San Diego County. Like everything kind of stops at LA. They have all the representation, and we miss out on a lot of things. And then kind of what I talked about with Stephen as well is being in San Diego County where we have the 5 and the 8, and we have border protection on both while this is federally illegal. We have to create a thriving marketplace that is able to, feed itself here in the county. And, we have a lot of opportunities we have some amazing agricultural land in the county and in Oceanside as well, that we can have an amazing marketplace, right here in San Diego County. So, I think you hit it right on the head there. We did have a question, regarding just if you have, talked about social equity with any local groups. Have you gotten any feedback from them on any changes that they would like to see?
I know that I have, forgive me, we do a lot of meetings every day in forums like this, but Donald, I've discussed this. Some of the other permit holders would discuss this. This has been a conversation in Sacramento. I've worked closely with Assembly members, Rob Bonta and Phil Ting, both of whom are leaders in this space around these issues. But I think this is an interesting point. Stephen was talking about strong mayor before, and I want to bring a different attitude to this. While Stephen was being kind to defer to me, this should be a collaboration. And I think one of the reasons that folks, I think, are somewhat critical, including myself, I campaigned against the strong mayor form of government when it was on the ballot. But funnily enough, I'd be the first former city council president to become mayor. And I think one of my observations about this form of government is that the mayor feels removed from the community. Previous to this form of government, the mayor would sit in on city council meetings, and since then, the mayor has not. And that's led to a void or a distance in between the community and the city's chief executive person making a lot of decisions on behalf of 1.3 million people. So to that question, I imagine probably there's some piece of that is like, how are we going to get into to see this guy again after he wins, right? Because we know that you're not going to be at the city council meetings, whatever. I'm going to bring that same activist in the community approach that you've seen me use as a city council member and as a state assembly member to my role as mayor. I know that's not something that we've been accustomed to in San Diego, but this would not be the last time you see me. Quite the opposite. I'm going to need your help, if for no other reason than we're stepping into a city that's dealing with a global pandemic, economic recession,
Yeah.
racial justice, reconciliation, climate crisis, gun violence. There's a multitude of challenges, and you can't navigate these waters by yourself. We're going to have to invite everyone in. And so, a long-winded digression to say, on this issue of social equity, I've not, luckily in my life, been criminally justice involved. I don't necessarily always know where the barriers are for individuals. And so I'm going to need your help to identify those barriers. And to the extent the city can remove them, allow us to remove them. And if it's a state or federal issue, allow me to use the bully pulpit of the mayor's office, as well as our city's paid lobbyists in both capitals, to try and advance an agenda to remove those barriers to equitable distribution of the benefits of the cannabis industry.
Okay, that's awesome. All right, so we're getting pretty close here. I wanted to just see if anybody has any questions. If you do have any questions, please put them in the question and answer portion at the bottom here. While we're waiting for that, I guess, how's the race going? What can we do to help you out? Just a quick synopsis on that while we wait for a couple questions to come in.
It's good, Dallin. And how you know is that my opponent says crazy stuff about me on a daily basis. So you know you're really far ahead when they, you may have saw a news story last week about a forged document trying to implicate me in some crazy land deal, which was proven to be false, and the story had to actually be retracted, which is an extraordinary thing in journalism. There's some horrible headlines about pedophilia, which is the lowest of low blows, particularly against an openly gay candidate. This is what they're going to have to do because they recognize that we're so far ahead. Our polling shows me ahead by about 13 points. We are 47 days away from the election. So we are in a strong position, but like Stephen, you can't take anything for granted. I may be that far ahead, but I got to run like I'm 10 points behind. So my ask of this group today would be to go to toddgloria.com, make a contribution if you can, request a yard sign, be one of our digital organizers. We have phone banks going every single night, and we probably have 60 to 70 volunteers every night making calls and doing texts on my behalf. We are pushing this as best we can because the pandemic has really handcuffed us from our ability to do what we would normally do. What Dal and I have done in the past is go out and knock doors and talk to voters on their doorsteps. Well, we can't do that right now. So we need to find other ways. And again, digital organizing, phone banks, text banks, as well as your contributions to help us put our message on television, on social media. That is the way that you can be most helpful to me. My opponent is a very, very, very wealthy woman who lives in La Jolla. She does not have to raise money. I do. And so with your help, we can get this job done on November the 3rd.
Okay, great. All right, so we did get a question regarding cannabis lounges. Right now, it's well, if you don't own your property and you're renting, and it doesn't explicitly say that you can't consume in your property, there's really nowhere that you can consume legally. You can't consume in public. You can't consume at any of these facilities. You can't consume in the parks, in your car, anything like that. What are your thoughts on on-site consumption or lounges as an addition to current licensing or as a separate use?
I'm open to it. And this has been a discussion both in Sacramento and I think here locally. It may be that the legislature takes some additional steps, which I think is probably beneficial to have a level playing field around the state. But I see this as probably the next step in this incremental progress that we're on, right? You go from a very small number of dispensaries to a larger number in a small number in very confined areas, perhaps more evenly distributed. When I think about not just on-site consumption, but also events, things of that nature, I think that there are, again, some mutually beneficial ways that this could help the industry, well, meet consumer demand, assist the industry, and again, help the city that's going to need more revenue in order to accomplish the things we need to do to keep you safe, keep you housed, keep our economy moving forward. So there's an openness to that. I think that's probably one of the harder conversations we're going to have to do. Again, people's perceptions. And I'm going to really rely upon you. Help me exactly. Help me explain to folks that, if we're okay with beer gardens at civic events, if we're okay with bars, that there's an inequity here that needs exploration, and it's probably going to be something very modest, at least initially, to again show people this is not what you should be concerned about. We can do this safely, effectively, address issues about driving while under the influence, etc. I think we can do that. And again, what I'm saying is we'll have an open door. figure out how to do that in a responsible way that the community can accept, always with the commitment to continue to show that good behavior gets rewarded with additional responsibilities, so that we can, again, move forward and develop a more mature industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Do like the event thing. I mean, ever since I was little, I mean, you go to concerts and that's like the main things. Everybody is smoking and everything. And, more issues come from alcohol than they do from cannabis. And so I think that's as you talked about, beer gardens at specific events. I think that's another important thing to think about. So thank you so much for that. All right. So I don't think you have any other questions here. We've got about 2 minutes left. So once again, I'd just like to thank you so much for spending your time with us today and talking about this important issue. Any, I guess, final words before we wrap up?
I just appreciate the opportunity. Again, as I mentioned, we're all stuck at home, right? So the chance to connect with you, Colin, it's always good to see you and hang out with Stephen, and then with the folks that are on the Zoom. Thank you for your time. I think you're here because you not only care about your industry, but you care about our city. And that's a point of connection between us. I'm running for mayor because I think for too long, we're a big city that's been masquerading as a small town. And it's time for us to stop doing that, to start thinking big as the second largest city in California, 8th largest in the country. And I think when we do that, we can engage on issues like cannabis from a mature adult perspective and see some forward progress. We can make sure that things like scooters and vacation rentals are not the main issues in the mayor's race, that the issues that are truly gripping our community, which is housing affordability, homelessness, and infrastructure, that's a part of the conversation. So I'm really excited about this. After 2 years of campaigning, I'm sure Stephen feels the same way. We're tired of talking about what we want to do, and we want to get to work. So my hope is come December 10th, we can be sworn in, we can get to work. And I appreciate the relationship that I've built over the years with this industry. I look forward to deepening and strengthening it in the years ahead.
Awesome. Okay. Once again, thank you so much. Thanks so much for everything. We look forward to getting you elected. Ballots drop in 18 days where, the people are going to be starting to vote then. And the election is in, it said 45?
46.
How many days? 46. So, all right. Well, this one absolutely cannot wait for the end of, as I'm sure you know. So, yes. Awesome. Well, we're right at 12:30, and I know you got a lot of stuff going on. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much, everybody that joined us today. I'd like to thank our sponsors once again, Cannabis Real Estate Consultants, the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, Americans for Safe Access, and the California Coastal Pacific PAC. Thank you all so much, Assembly member. Appreciate it, and we look forward to getting you inaugurated on December 10th.
I love it. Thanks, John. Everyone be well. Stay safe.